Dr. Fauci, thank you so much for joining me today. It's a real pleasure and honor for you to join me today. Dr. Fauci is the director of the U.S. National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases and the chief medical advisor to President Biden. Again, thank you so much for joining me today.
Good to be with you, Quinn.
Thank you. It's an honor to be with you. My first question is if you could talk a little bit about the current COVID-19 vaccination process and what the things you're doing to support people with disabilities and syndromes.
Okay, so let's take the first question first, Quinn. The rollout of the vaccine has really been quite successful. If you look at what's gone on over the last few months, particularly since the inauguration of President Biden, we now have a little bit more than a third of the adult population is fully vaccinated, and about a little bit more than half of the adult population has had at least one dose. We were averaging between 3 and 4 million people per day getting vaccinated, and recently it's gone down a little bit, understandably, because the pool of people to be vaccinated is getting smaller because more people are getting vaccinated. So we're averaging now between 2.5 to 3 million people a day. The good news is that the individuals who are elderly, those who've been the most vulnerable, about 80+% of them have received at least one dose, and about 65 to 70% have been fully vaccinated, which has resulted in a diminution in the hospitalization and death of people who are elderly, 65 years of age or older, by at least 70 to 85%, 75 to 85%. That's really important because you remember several months ago, when we were in the big heat of the surge early on, the first surges, that people in nursing homes, the elderly, accounted for up to 40% of all the deaths in the country. Now that's a group that really is quite protected. When you talk about what we're doing for people with disabilities, that's a really great question. And that's an important part of our outreach program of equity. So President Biden has made it clear from the top down that our program of vaccine and getting people protected has to be completely integrated into the concept of equity. And when we say equity, we mean equity in the classic sense, equal for everyone. And that is for minorities, for people with disabilities, for people who are in situations where they don't have ready and easy accessibility to vaccines. So we feel very good about the fact that we can say equity is really the hallmark of our vaccination distribution effort.
In your view, what are some of the biggest challenges people with disabilities face during this unfortunate pandemic? And is there, a lot of people with disabilities live alone, and they don't have the fortunate need help to help them to go get vaccinated. What do you advise for people with disabilities that are in that situation?
Well, first of all, you answered the question yourself, which is the correct answer, is that it is the difficulty in getting accessibility to vaccines. And I would think that getting linked to community people who could help, there are a number of organizations right now that actually help people come to door, not just people with recognized disability, but sometimes the elderly who live alone, as do many people with disabilities, who need help in either getting things brought to them or help in getting to the particular place where the intervention is available. In this case, the intervention is a vaccine. So I would suggest that people try to get information about what organizations are around that might be able to do that. The second thing is that sometimes people with disabilities have a disability which would make them more susceptible to a serious outcome if they did get infected. And that is even as serious as the situation of accessibility. But again, trying to get both organizations and community assistance in making sure that the equity component of the vaccine addresses those types of situations, both the accessibility to the intervention and the speed with which you get it, particularly if you do get infected.
I read a little bit about the long-term effects that COVID-19 can have on people, and what journalists are actually calling long COVID. Um, and it's a really disabling effect that it can have on a lot of people. Can you talk a little bit more about that with the symptoms and the research, what people should know about the long-term effect?
Yes, there is a big study right now that has gotten substantial support from the Congress and the administration to look at what's called long COVID or post-acute symptomatic COVID, where people clear the virus from their body, but they have the residue of symptoms that are very interesting because they're not easily explainable by an identifiable laboratory test. It occurs in anywhere from 10% to, one study said, up to 30% of people. It doesn't matter whether you get COVID and have mild symptoms, get moderate symptoms, symptoms enough to go to the hospital, or even very severe illness, which requires everything from mechanical ventilation to high flow oxygen. At the end of the day, a certain proportion of people, when they clear the viral aspect of it from their body, have a peculiar lingering of a rather consistent set of signs and symptoms. And the lingering can be as long as 8-9 months, because some people have gotten infected early on last year, still have the lingering of the symptoms. And it's profound fatigue, muscle ache, temperature dysregulation, something referred to as dysautonomia, rapid heartbeat, referred to as tachycardia, sleep disorders, some neurological disorders, and what's called brain fog, namely an inability to focus or concentrate when you're reading or when you're looking at a computer or when you're trying to do something that requires your full attention. So what we're doing now, we're building up large cohorts of people to be able to determine the true incidence, the true scope of the manifestations, perhaps what the underlying pathogenesis is, if we can find it. And if so, are there any interventions that we can implement to help people to hasten the full recovery from this long COVID?
And one question I had for you that I just remembered my wife actually wanted me to ask you, was because I have a 8-year-old stepdaughter, and she was thinking, what about if our daughter had a disability or a syndrome? When do you think people who have children with disabilities or syndrome, when do you think they'll be able to get vaccinated?
Well, I think people with disabilities, there's no contraindication. It really relates to the age. So someone with a disability who's 16 years of age or older right now can get vaccinated. The disability should absolutely not hinder them from getting vaccinated. When the children wind up getting through the clinical trials, and we already have a clinical trial that's shown that in kids from 12 to 15, the vaccine is highly efficacious and safe. So hopefully soon we'll be vaccinating kids from 12 to 15. Whether they have disabilities or not, they can get vaccinated. And then over the next several months, we're doing studies that are called age de-escalation, where you look at kids from 12 years old to 9 years old, 9 years old to 6 years old, 6 years old to 2 years old, and then 6 months to 2 years old. And hopefully by the end of this year, and at the latest, the beginning of the first quarter of 2022, we'll be able to vaccinate children of any age.
What bright spots do you see on the horizon for people with disabilities as our vaccinations continue to expand?
Well, I would see that people with disabilities will be essentially treated like everybody else, namely getting vaccinated, getting protected, and if in fact they do get infected, to get them the appropriate care as quickly and as expeditiously as possible. So my bright spot that I see is that we've done a group of clinical trials, and the clinical trials have shown that the vaccine is highly efficacious and safe. The really good news, Quinn, is that now that we get more and more experience in the real world out there of giving vaccines to tens and tens and tens of millions of people, is that the efficacy, which is really now effectiveness in the community, is at least as good as it was in the clinical trials, which is really, really good news for us.
So my last question for you, Dr. Fauci, is what do you look forward to in a world with non-COVID-19?
Yeah, I look forward to what I believe every one of us look forward to, is really getting back to the normal life that we probably didn't fully appreciate it because we took it for granted. So if there's any silver lining when we get out of this and we go back to our normal everyday existence, that we start to fully appreciate the little things in life that we couldn't do during the restrictions and constraints of our response to COVID, that maybe we look at life through a different lens and really begin to appreciate things a little bit more.
Dr. Anthony Fauci, thank you so much. You are the man, the legend himself. You are a wonderful person, a wonderful man, and I thank you so much for everything that you're doing for America and the world.
Thank you very much, Quinn. It's a pleasure to be with you, and thank you for all the good things you're doing. Take care.
You too. Thank you so much.